principal agency problem. So it has been identified that when in such cases senior management or board positions are dominated by promoters or these major shareholders, leading to a potentially weak corporate governance. So this environment of weak corporate governance and the information asymmetry that the minority shareholders face, coupled with the external pressure to be good or to be virtuous, the managers tend to choose greenwashing practices rather than engage into a substantive action. So it is hypothesized that concentrated ownership and greenwashing are positively related. Now coming to the audit quality, with the concerns of greenwashing rising, there is also a need to improve robust audit and assurance because it will ensure confidence and credibility of the measurements and disclosures of non-financial information. So it is, I mean, when a company spend money or set aside resources to improve the audit quality of the financial information, it is kind of a signal that the company is ready to make a commitment to improve the overall disclosure quality. So we can extend that as a signal of a company's commitment to improve the non-financial information quality also. So it is hypothesized that audit quality and greenwashing are negatively related, where as the audit quality improves, greenwashing reduces. And we also look at financial constraints. We studied in the past literature by a few papers, especially in Chinese environment. They try to extend that study where it is hypothesized that when companies face financial constraint, when they are in need of capital access to funds or capital, they want to create a positive image in an easy way. So, in order to change the perception of shareholders or the fund providers, they tend to participate in the more greenwashing activities in the context of financial constraints. So, it is being hypothesized that financial constraints and greenwashing are positively related. Now, moving on to the data and methodology, we consider non-financial Indian companies. So we start with Indian companies that has the ESG information. So we have 105 companies for a period of 2015 to 2022 based on the availability of data. So we downloaded the ESG and governance variables from Bloomberg database and the financial variables from CMI Prof. So this is an empirical model where our dependent variable is the greenwashing score, which is a proxy for greenwashing, and concentrated ownership, audit quality, and KC index is a proxy for financial constraints. These are our independent variable, and anxiety represents set of controls and the other error. Now, this a little more into the variables. So, greenwashing score. So here we try to operationalize the concept of greenwashing as the difference between what is being disclosed and what is being their actual performance. So one of the major available scores that quantify these two concepts are the Bloomberg ESG disclosure score and Bloomberg ESG performance score. So we take the difference between ESG disclosure score and ESG performance as our greenwashing score, which is widely used in the literature as well. So first of all, we normalize these two scores, disclosure and performance score. Then we take the difference. And an alternative measure for robustness, we also use a greenwashing dummy, where whenever there is excess disclosure over the performance score, the normalized performance score, we consider the greenwashing dummy as 1, otherwise as 0. So this is being used as a robustness for the analysis. Then concentration ownership, owing to the specific nature of India, where we have where the ownership is heavily concentrated by promoters, it is being proxied by the percentage of promoter ownership. Then audit quality, it is proxied by the audit fees paid to the auditors, as higher audit fees indicate more resources devoted to ensure quality. Then financial constraints, we use the Kaplan and Fingers index, where the index is a function of cash flow from operations, dividend, cash and cash equivalents, total debt, and province. We also control for firm size, asset turnover ratio, and certain corporate governance factors like board size, women representation on board, and board independence. Now, moving on to the results, this is the discrete statistics. If you look at the mean greenwashing score, the mean score comes to 0. But if you look at the standard deviation, we have a quite variation in the sample where the minimum ranges from minus 3.24 to maximum of 2.35. Then if you look at the greenwashing, then we can see that 47% of the firms in our sample engage into greenwashing, or they have an excessive disclosure compared to the performance. And the average concentration ownership is 53.24, audit fee is 20.89 million rupees, and these are other variables. So coming to the regression results, we have controlled for the industry fixed effects and year fixed effects. Also, we have included the robust standard errors and other assumptions are being tested. So if we look at the results, we can see that concentration ownership has a positive impact on the greenwashing. So as the promoter ownership increases, greenwashing, the firms tend to engage into more greenwashing practices. Then coming to the audit fee, it has a negative impact, whereas the audit quality improves, the quality of non-financial information also improves. But we couldn't find any significant results with respect to financial constraints. So we can see that a significant positive association between concentrated ownership and greenwashing score. A higher percentage of concentrated ownership tend to engage in more greenwashing. Audit fee has significant negative impact. So a high quality audit curbs greenwashing and ensure quality disclosure. And again, the KC index is not insignificant. So we also use the greenwash dummy and run a logic regression to check the results. So here also again we can see the inconsistent results where the concentrated ownership has a positive impact and the audit fee has a negative impact and the financial constraints are insignificant. Now we also looked at the environmentally sensitive industry versus non-environmentally sensitive industries because the pressure on environmentally sensitive industries are tend to be more because they have more attention from the stakeholders because of their because they have huge impact on the environment. So it is expected that they actually take more actions compared to the other firms. So they have more pressure from the external stakeholders. So if we look at the results, we can see that the relationships which we identified is more pronounced in the case of environmentally sensitive industry. So the pressure being more, they have more tendency to the impact of the promoter ownership is more pronounced coupled with this particular pressure. So the concentrated ownership has a significant positive impact on ESI companies, whereas it is the magnitude is less when it comes to the non-ESI companies. Audit fees has a positive negative impact while it is insignificant for non-ESI, and also we can see that financial constraints has a positive impact as there is more financial constraints and more financial needs or difficulty to meet the have access to the capital market. They tend to engage into more greenwashing, especially in the case of ESI companies. So the same results I am not repeating. So concluding, so here we examine the greenwashing practices of Indian companies and the factors that influence their behavior. So we identified three crucial determinants. One is concentrated ownership, which has a positive relationship with greenwashing practices, where it is more pronounced in ESI companies. We also look at the audit quality, which reduces the greenwashing practices, and the financial constraints is an important determinant when it comes to the environmentally sensitive companies. And we contribute to the emerging literature on determinants of greenwashing in ESG disclosure, and it has practical implications for regulators and investors. So whenever investors who are especially interested in ESG factors, when they just look at the disclosures of the claims, it is important that they look at the ownership structure also and be, careful when they make such decisions. And also for the regulators, they can look at the ownership structure and the audit requirements. New rules or updations can be brought into picture which ensure the quality of ESG disclosures. Thank you. And any suggestions?
And so I just have two observations. You said you got your data from Dover. See, I think the sample that you got is quite a small sample of 105 companies. If you were to look at the coverage that you have in say, Reuters Icon, you have a much better coverage in terms of sample. So I don't know whether you want to. You have similar sample.
Companies we have, but the performance for all this many years we only have 1.5 companies. That's how it was reduced. And even I actually looked at the representative also, that's the same case. Okay. Consistent sample, we only have.
The other question I have is for financial constraints, you just cut down Zingaris, right? You could cut hard rock and peers, so they have a serious sort of problems with the KZ index. So did you try running your financial constraints using alternative indices? I think we should look at hard rock and peers, the RFS. They have an excellent index which is much more cleaner, and with 20% do have an index, which is something that you should use. So KZ index has a problem, and that's the paper that Adobe is around. So you should go back. Probably why you're not getting the main result. In the main table, you don't have a result. But in the additional analysis, when you split between environmental sensitive and non-sensitive, then you have some sort of result. I think you need to do a little bit more robustness analysis checks on your financial constraints index.
The similar results we got.
Try Adobe peers also. Yeah.
So your main measure is a measure of the firm relative to the average of all firms in your sample or average of firms in the industry?
Where I normalize.
Yeah.
The normalization is based on all the firms, not industry wise. I have that.
Yeah. So my concern with that is if one firm adjusts, and you have a small sample, if one firm has a big change in actual performance, it affects the performance measure for all the other firms. And so the effect you're capturing is not because of something the firm did or did not do, but because of what the other firms changed. And so it would be useful for you to look at what their raw performance change was in addition to looking at the standardized performance change. There's a lot of merit to doing standardization, especially because you might have these two scores measured over different ranges. I don't know the details of these scores. Then it might be better for you to rescale the scores to put them on the same measure rather than mean adjust them. Because that's my big worry because you have a small sample. If you're 2,000 firms, it might be less of a concern.
Instead of mean adjusting, I can scale the variables and
then you scale the scores to the same scale and then look at the difference. The second comment is this feels to me a lot like bad stuff in one area is going to be bad stuff in another area. Right? So it's like, if we know that, for instance, audit quality and things like that are bad, or lack of audit quality is bad, concentration or concentrated ownership might be bad in some settings. We're just going to say, okay, therefore it must be true that these guys also greenwash. Is that the sense in which you want to build your hypothesis, or are you thinking of the differential costs of greenwashing across different industries, the observability of these, and those factors might be more important. Especially when you have a small sample, I think it might be useful for you to consider the texture of what is it that is doing this? What are these greenwashing people greenwashing about? Are they lying about employees? Are they lying about something else?
So
And not putting on weight. Yeah, so whatever they are misstating or overstating their abilities or whatever they have done.
Instead of looking at the overall, maybe I can look at the subcomponents or the type of greenwashing they are engaging in.
So kind of go back to Professor Kalapu's statement. What is the mechanism? What is it that they are doing or not doing? Okay. What are they talking about that they are not performing and it's not easily verified? If you can do this difference, The market can do the difference. Why are they not getting punished? So what is it that you are actually finding here? I think it might be an interesting thing to actually ask. What is it that we are doing and go after that more.
My view is that you have too much confidence in the data that you're getting on disclosure versus performance. Unless you have great confidence that you know the tone and content of those disclosures, you do not know from your own evidence whether what is being said is positive, neutral, or negative. So the amount of disclosure, a lot of these things are quantity numbers. And you can get an extensive disclosure that just gives a lot of facts about wastewater emissions and water consumption and other things. That gets converted through the mechanism that Bloomberg or Signature somebody else uses into.
Yeah, there is something on selective disclosure that
Yes.
classify the disclosure into positive, negative, or so. Yeah.
I think that you have undue confidence in the constructability of the measure that is associated with greenwashing. And I'm sorry to say that, you're relying on what other people have done. And I know I sound critical, but you're too accepting of other people's assumptions. And what you've done, as Professor Rama said, is come up with a little constellation of largely endogenous variables that seem to be clustered. Big audit fees versus ownership structure and whatever that FRQ thing is. So honestly, I'll talk to you during the break, but I would do this a little differently, and I'd be much more skeptical about this greenwashing business. Sorry, I don't mean to be negative.
No, I understand. We also had similar thoughts. We also had similar confusions regarding the measure. But then also we chose to go with what the reports are highly used. But still, I need to, when I take up the study further, definitely, I want to go with it more further. Yes, further.
Yeah, and I had a question. You said in your research, in your results, that if your ownership concentration, if your ownership is highly concentrated, then you do greenwashing the more.
Yeah.
Right? So what are you suggesting? Should we kind of, lower the ownership concentration, and then, and then we have the problems, right? I mean, nobody is monitoring the firm then.
Yeah.
And then how do you argue? So please think about these questions.
We specifically look at the promoted market, so maybe there should be some kind of control mechanism over the promoted over influence on the board decision or the managerial position. So I think that will be the way to go. But yeah, definitely simply reducing the ownership doesn't work.
Any other question? Last question. Okay, thank you. Thank you. For the next presentation, we have Mr. Akash Sharma from Bengaluru. And the topic of this presentation is interim mergers and acquisitions, interim earnings announcements by the acquirer.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, mergers and acquisitions, interim earnings announcement by acquirer. So, this is still a work in progress. So, as many comments, the more the comments, the better, I guess. I mean, as a brief overview, like what are we doing here? So, okay, so from the accounting literature, we know that earnings numbers are value added, as in like if without going into more details, but just if a firm has some excess earnings, in the sense like you were expecting it to make $2 per share, but it made $2.30 per share, so that's a good thing, and the market takes it positively, and we see positive surprise. So I mean that's pretty basic. Like so, if a firm's unexpected earnings would be related to its own returns. That's how market would perceive it. And on the other hand, it should have an effect only on that firm. So any unrelated firm should not have any effect on it. So all things equal. But now we're looking at a case when there's a merger M&A transaction pending. So a firm announces that okay, we're gonna these firm A and firm B are gonna merge, but it doesn't happen right then and there. It takes sometimes 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, all. So if during this interim period, that is, if the firm releases its earnings, now in this case, the two firms are not unrelated firms. These are now related firms. So how does the market's perception, the market's reaction to this same information change? That is the basic thing that we're looking at. So there are two firms which, prior to the announcement of the deal, they were unrelated firms. So in that case, firm A releases its numbers, firm B should not have any effect on it. But now, while the transaction is pending, these are no longer completely unrelated firms. They might end up merging, they might not end up merging. Many things to come in, but still the firms are related now during this interim period. And how does that affect? So that's what we're going to be looking at. So basically, so M&As we know that significant and complex transactions, significant in the sense like as an investment decision, it is economically significant, very large transaction. Complexity in terms of time consumption and like you need to get approvals from regulators and all shareholders and stuff like that. So basically, this deal completion thing it takes substantial time, but more than that, it can take an indeterminate amount of time. So this indeterminate amount of time, this interim period, this can overlap with various value relevant events, one of which is the accounting numbers that are being announced by the acquirer. So in this case, what we're saying that, so in the default case, whatever are the unexpected earnings of the firm A, the acquiring firm, so all of those would be accruing to the firm itself because that's a standalone firm. But now, since there is a likelihood of it being merged or it acquiring another firm, so not all of these earnings would be accrued to the announcing firm itself, but some of them may accrue to the target as well, depending on the what the transaction terms are. So that's the basic issue or basic basic issue that we have, that these two firms are no longer unrelated, so we might see some effect. And then, so usually studies have looked at interim at the time of announcement of the deal, when the deal gets completed, returns after the completion, but not many studies look at the interim period. So that's one thing that we're trying to cover as well, I guess. And then, so like I mentioned, so during this interim period, it is not really obvious how the investors may respond. So there are many questions. We're not going to we're not covering like all of these, but like just like what could be this possible like. So does it relate to the only announcing firm, or does it relate to the combined entity? Would the earnings accrue to only one firm or both of them? Is there a possibility that the acquiring firm, because there's a pending transaction, did they engage in earnings management? Because literature also documents that. And then these numbers themselves, which are being released, do they affect the likelihood of deal completion? Because one reason why we are saying that these are related firms or there might be spillover between the two firms is because investors are going assumption is that the transaction would complete. Because if our assumption was that it's not going to be a finished transaction, then we should not see any such effect. And then how does these effect vary by various deal characteristics, as in like whether it is a stock finance deal or a cash finance deal, or how big is the acquiring firm related to the target firm. So these are the basic things that we are, basic questions that come to mind, and we're going to explore some of this, not all of this. So, okay. So now moving to, so yeah, like I mentioned, so as you can see here, so this is a visual representation. So like, let's say acquisition announcement happened here, there's a completion. It could be the case that both the firms release their earnings, only one of them release their earnings, none of them release their earnings, but we're only looking at the announcement by the acquirer. The target may as well release their earnings during this interim period, but we're not focusing on that, we're focusing on the announcement by the acquirer only. So in the normal case, like I mentioned, so firms earnings would accrue to the firm itself, and then there are obviously we also know that there are asymmetry in reactions to positive surprises versus negative surprises, and then this how the market reacts. That's the ERC. It is also dependent on like how likely these unexpected earnings are to be persistent or not, and it also depends on the growth of the growth prospects of the firm. So these are the things that we know going in, and for the default case, as in like whether there's a pending transaction or not, just normal firm, normal day, no M&A. But this is proven case for like that's what I'll call, let's say, the default case. Okay. Now, so during the interim period, what could be the case? So if first thing we're saying is, okay, the earnings numbers released during the interim period versus the default case, like let's say prior to the announcement of the deal. So the default case we're saying that is how the firms, that is how the market reacts to it. On the other hand, during the interim period, there's a certain reaction by market. So our basic hypothesis is that these two are different. These two are, so let's say for 10 units of unexpected earnings, market for the same firm gives 2% abnormal returns over 3-day period. But if the same amount of unexpected earnings are released during the interim period, we're saying is the reaction would not be same. More specifically, it would be less, but without going into the like direction of it, but still those two numbers would be different. That is the basic. That is the first thing. And then interim period and the completion, we have already spoken about that. Okay. So yeah. So first thing is the two things are the two announcements are different. Second thing is if they are different, and some of the numbers are getting accrued to the target as well. So then it can only be the case when it is a stock finance deal or some sort of some portion of the deal is stock finance, either entirely 100% stock finance or maybe some portion. Because if it is an entirely cash finance deal, then in that case, whatever is the amount that is set on the deal announcement, time that stays and it does not change. On the other hand, if it is a stock finance deal and then something interim earnings come out and the stock price change and then whatever is the ratio defined, that is the channel through which the earnings would be going towards the target, because the expectation is eventually there would be a combined merged entity, so the target should be getting some of those unexpected earnings, or yeah. And then the last thing is about the probability of completion. So if there is some way we can say that this deal is more likely to get completed, then in that case we would expect to see this effect to be effect in the sense this reduction in the ERC basically to be higher for the highly likely deals. On the other hand, if it is a low likely deal, then it is then we would not expect it to go this way basically. So that's that. And then, so literature does talk about earnings management around mergers and acquisitions, but at this point, since this is a work in progress, so like in our preliminary test, so like preliminary hypothesis, we just not accounting for like earnings management, because then it would just complicate stuff more. So basically that's like the brief introduction. So like moving on to hypothesis development. So like I mentioned, earnings numbers are value relevant. Market responses is affected by the sign of the surprise and the uncertainty around the deal. It also affects how the market perceives the earnings announcement. And apart from that, there are various uh, flags or various ways in which we, for which research points that would increase the likelihood of completion. So basically, like if there is already some toehold by the acquirer in the firm, if there exists some deal protection devices, or if there are like some termination fees associated with the deal, that if you terminate the deal, there are some fees you have to pay, stuff like that. So these are the details we can get easily from SDC. So basically, these are the things that we use to say that okay, whether or not this deal is a high probability deal or a low probability deal. So that's one method. And another way to look at the probability of completion, there's a paper by Gunn et al. Like 2022 looking. So they look at the exposed. So if the deal actually does go through, then they classify it as as a high probability deal, and if a deal gets withdrawn. So we also make use of that, but primarily since it's I mean, since yeah, it does. I mean, it makes sense, but not really to me. So that's why I went with both of the things. So basically, the first hypothesis is like I mentioned. So if there is so okay, so for the acquirer has some unexpected earnings, given some unexpected earnings, either positive or negative surprise, and then for the so acquirer on acquirer. So acquirer releases its numbers, the cumulative abnormal return for the acquirer. It should not be. So in our null case, it should be zero. But yeah, so that means that. And in the second case, since target and acquirer prior to the deal are unrelated, and which is also we're trying to investigate. So in the second case, we look at if the target's car given the unexpected earnings by the acquirer. So we look at that. So that's the first thing. Just the basic effect, like the car reaction is different during the interim period. That's the first and the starting point for it. So once that's done, so then we look at how does it vary because of the financing method. So we compare three specific things, whether it is 100% cash finance, entirely cash finance, some mixed financing, and some stock finance. So in our case, so all three cases should be the same. That, that is, yeah. But on our prediction, on the other hand, is that cash finance deal is the only one in which there would be no effect. On the other hand, for mixed finance and stock finance, since there are some sharing of income that has to happen, in those two cases are the ones where we would see the reduction in the ERC. And then sign of earnings surprise, that's negative earnings versus positive earnings surprises. So that's not very relevant because I mean it makes sense. So I mean yeah, that's just the likelihood of deal completion. So yeah, for we have so probability if the probability of deal completion is higher, so then in that case the effect or the reduction in ERC should be higher. If the probability is low of completion, then in that case it should be the other way around. And for probability of deal completion, we also look at, like I mentioned, whether it's a friendly deal versus a hostile deal, whether it is a deal in a related industry versus unrelated industry. So these are the two ways or two proxies we use for signifying a deal to be a high probability deal or a deal with a higher likelihood of completion. So that's the basic hypotheses that we have, and then we For the empirical work, so data sources are pretty standard, like SPC for M&ADs, IPs for forecasts and risk CompuStat and all. And then for our sample, what we need is both the target and the acquirer have to be publicly listed firms so that we can get the market returns data. And then we need the characteristics from the SDCs, like what is the size of the deal and the ratio of the size of the firm. So it would be the case that the firm being acquired is insignificant compared to the size of the acquiring firm. So then in that case, economically we should not see that big of a fit. And then other deal characteristics, whether they're the same industry, payment method, whether they have some deal protection devices, and nature of the deal in the sense like friendly versus hostile. So these are the data points we get regarding the deal. For firm characteristics, pretty standard, like firm size, market to book, leverage, and pre-announcement hours. And then stock and market returns, pretty standard. And then analyst forecasts to get like the abnormal earnings, and so or the earnings surprises. So like I mentioned, so we need to have ensure public acquirers and publicly listed targets, and there has to be at least one interim announcement being made by the acquirer. The deal size has to be large and economically meaningful, and the deal has to be entirely cash finance or stock finance. So right now we're looking at both, like some stock finance or entirely stock finance. But yeah, we could split it into like three things. But since our basic hypothesis was only for cash finance deal, we should not see this uh, income being shared with the target. So that's why whether if it is even if it is 10% stock finance or 100% stock finance, we're considering it as some sort of stock finance. So that's how we arrive at a sample, and then for testing these hypotheses, like pretty like so cumulative normal returns of acquirer, and then regress it on the unexpected earnings of the acquirer, and then control for the firm and deal characteristics. So that's for the first hypothesis, just to confirm like whether the interim earnings are different than normal earnings. And then in the for the second and third hypothesis, basically we have like whether the deal is high likely, we add a dummy variable for that, and then interact it with the unexpected earnings. And same way for like deal characteristics, it could be whether it is friendly deal or non-friendly deal, whether it is cash finance. So these are we use dummy variables basically. Yeah. So is friendly, is cash finance, and is related. So these are the three deal characteristics which we use to say. Okay. All right. So that's that. But yeah. So we have some preliminary results at this point. So what we have done is we used the market adjusted model with evaluated total returns index, and then we did some sub-sample analysis for acquirers announcements and for withdrawn deals versus completed deals. These are the three broad results that we have at this point. So the relationship that we find between our own earnings, as in like acquirer's earnings, and its own car, that is significant for both the benchmarks and for all the three periods. So car 0, car 2, and car 5. So we look at these three windows, and then the cross relationship, it does not exist in the prior period, prior to the announcement period. That's that. And then like for the snapshot of results. So these are all preliminary at this point, because we don't have like all the firm level controls added. But so far, like for the unexpected earnings on its own, acquirer's own, so we do see some sort of reduction. So that is the basic result that we see. And then same thing for the high probability versus low probability deals. But again, like I mentioned, so it's still work in progress. So we have to still add more controls and stuff like that. So that's that. And contributions. So yeah, basically we examine the setting where the investors are unsure like how the earnings would accrue. to whom would it accrue? And then how does the market incorporate this value relevant information? So does it depend on the deal characteristic? Does it depend on firm characteristic? Likelihood of deal completion? Does this information actually affect the deal completion likelihood? So these are the things that we broadly look at. So that's the work I have so far. Questions? Comments?
I was very confused thinking about why you think that the earnings are going to be shared with someone. That concern arises if the target is not priced appropriately at the time the acquisition is done. If the target is appropriately priced and the payment is appropriate, how does it matter whether the earnings is split with just them or with the target, because they're getting value of assets and stuff that covers the whatever they're paying for the target. Seems to be you have a maintained hypothesis that they're somehow overpaying for the target with too much stock, and therefore the dividends to the acquirer shareholders would be reduced because they're an inordinate share of that is going to the target shareholders. Is that the idea that you have? I mean, no, because otherwise I don't see why they don't get the money.
No, the way I look at it is, so when I announced the deal and I said like, okay, for every 3 shares of your firm, I'll give you 2 shares of my firm, and those were based on whatever the information was with the 2 parties at that time. But during the interim period, there was no unexpected. So the fact is there's some unexpected earnings. So in the sense, how we valued our valuation at that point was not accurate. So if we are saying that okay, now because of these unexpected earnings, now my 2 shares are worth not your 3 shares but worth your 2.9 shares or 2.8 shares. But since the number has already been decided, like the exchange ratio has been decided at the time of announcement, then that additional income or additional money basically, so that would have, so the target would